The White House continues to express confidence that an agreement with Iran to end the war will be reached soon. This public optimism comes as mediators work behind the scenes to bridge the gap between the two warring parties, with Pakistan's army chief meeting with several Iranian officials this week, including the country's parliament speaker, who Vice President J.D. Vance held talks with on Saturday. President Trump yesterday told reporters the next round of in-person negotiations could take place this weekend, days before the ceasefire is set to expire.
Are you considering extending the ceasefire with Iran?
With who?
With Iran.
We're doing very well, I can tell you. Maybe it'll happen before that. I'm not sure it needs to be extended. Just so you know, Iran wants to make a deal, and we're dealing very nicely with them. We've got to have no nuclear weapons. If we do, that's a big factor. And they're willing to do things today that they weren't willing to do 2 months ago. Very important is that Iran does not have a nuclear weapon, and they've agreed to that. Iran's agreed to that, and they've agreed to it very powerfully. They've agreed to give us back the nuclear dust that's way underground because of the attack we made with the B-2 bomber. So we have a lot of agreement with Iran, and I think something's going to happen very positive.
If there's no deal, would you be willing to extend the ceasefire, or will the fighting resume, Mr. President?
I would say the fighting. If there's no deal, fighting resume.
Meanwhile, a 10-day ceasefire between Israel and Lebanon is now in effect following negotiations brokered by the United States. In a video message yesterday, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu said his country has an opportunity to forge a historic peace agreement with Lebanon, but that Israeli forces would remain inside Lebanese territory in a reinforced security buffer zone. Iranian-backed Hezbollah militants inside Lebanon were not formally part of the agreement. So in his post yesterday announcing the agreement, President Trump said he directed Vice President J.D. Vance, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, and Joint Chiefs Chairman General Dan Kane to work with both sides to achieve a lasting peace. The president also posted that he will invite both Netanyahu and Lebanon's president to the White House. Richard Haass, you have a lot to say. Where do you want to begin?
In terms of just the narrow thing on Israel and Lebanon, always good when you see these sorts of things, but it's an enormous but.
Yeah.
The major actor, Hezbollah, is been left outside.
Not involved.
And the issue forever has not been Lebanon. It's been that Hezbollah has been and remains, if you will, a quote-unquote, a state within a state.
Right.
That the Lebanese government has been unable or at times unwilling, but we're unable to really take them on. Mm-hmm. So, again, this is a step in the right direction, but quite honestly, it's far, far, far removed from the real issue here. And this is one of the stumbling blocks. In terms of what the president said, Mika, nice to see the optimism. Two big issues, the Strait. And I think there we've made real progress. The blockade has put pressure on Iran's economy, and Iran's economy is their Achilles heel. It was before the war, and now the economy is in much worse shape. And I think Iran was not counting on, if you will, getting counter-blockaded. It thought it could close the Strait and inflict pain on the world. And by putting on the blockade, we've now put pain on Iran. And I don't think they were prepared for that. And they don't have the ability to withstand that for long. So I actually think that's a major step in the right direction. In terms of the nuclear issue, hard to know the details. I find it very difficult to imagine we can get the whole thing negotiated. Could we get a framework where United States and Iran agree to negotiate some ceilings on Iranian capabilities? If it sounds like the old Obama agreement, it could be a latter-day version of it. Possibly. But I think both sides, say one last thing. I think there's a logic now, at the risk of sounding optimistic, which is something I never do. I think there's a logic that neither side has a rationale to escalate. If Iran escalates, what does it get them? Right. And potentially their energy facilities are vulnerable, and it doesn't help their economy. If we escalate, Iran still has the option of attacking the energy facilities of every one of the neighbors. So I think in a funny sort of way, we've run out of targets, and the logic of this war is increasingly gone. So I think there is a chance diplomacy could work, but you got three big variables. Donald Trump, who knows who the leadership is of Iran, and Bibi Netanyahu. And right now, I think that's the biggest question.
Yeah, I mean,
Joe.
it's very exciting, Willie. You know, you had Bill Walsh's West Coast offense, and now in Iran we have Richard Haas's blockade, and that you got a trademark. You always have to tee him after you go the Haas blockade, but it has led to a sort of a sense of optimism in that this is so much better than, again, continuing to fire missiles into Iran and risking American lives and risking more Iranian lives. This blockade actually does seem to be drawing both sides closer to each other in the negotiating table. I think that's a positive thing, and I think it's important on a Friday. Let's talk about some positive things. That's positive. Also, when we talk to Kim Ghattas, you know, Kim is certainly no apologist for Israel or for Benjamin Netanyahu. I've been fascinated from the beginning of this war how Kim has reported that the people of Lebanon have been angered by Hezbollah very early on getting involved in this war and basically inviting attacks from Israel. And every time we talk to Kim, she does talk about how the people of Lebanon have just had enough of Hezbollah. So here we see, and as Richard says, we're a long way to any sort of peace plan here. But you look at the Abraham Accords that began the process of reforming how the Middle East looks geopolitically. And now you look at what may be happening between Lebanon and Israel. That is an opening. And we also have to say, long run, we don't know what's going to happen in Iran over the next week, the next month. We don't know what's going to happen with the Strait. We don't know what's going to happen with the Iran nuclear program. We do know this, though. This government was already wobbly, teetering on the brink of extinction. It's hard to see them surviving 6 months to the next year. Now, they may, but the people were already fed up with the horrid economic conditions before this war. It's only gotten that much worse now.
Yeah, it's good news that they're talking, like Richard said. The key, though, is Hezbollah, which, of course, embeds itself within the Lebanese population. So we'll see if there's progress here, but as you say, at least gives time and space. And Jonathan Lemire, you heard optimism from the president yesterday out there on his way leaving town. We hear optimism almost every day that things are going well, that he declares that Iran has agreed to things like never getting a nuclear weapon, which would be a big headline if true. He said they've agreed very powerfully. So you have to sift through the rhetoric of the president, who is going to be optimistic, even if there's nothing to be optimistic about. So what is your sense from talking to sources inside about where these negotiations stand? Is there real progress? Are there real talks going on?
Yeah, the phrase big if true has never applied more than it does right now, with pretty much everything out of President Trump's mouth about this war. Mark Caputo, who we had on earlier this week from Axios, I think distilled it so well. We were talking about this sort of new sense of optimism from White House aides about how things are going. And his rebuttal to that was, well, like, they're always optimistic. Like, that's how they are. So it's hard to really sift through what's real. I'm not aware, people I've talked to, of an agreement here about the nuclear program just yet. I do think it is fair to say, though, that the blockade is working, at least to an extent, like the U.S. hoped. The great question is, how long can Iran withstand it? And the experts have really differed on their analysis. Some say, yeah, it's only going to be a couple of weeks and they're really going to buckle. Others believe this could be 3, 4, 5, 6 months. Eventually, everyone agrees that Tehran won't be able to take it anymore. The issue is, how much pain is the U.S. willing to take between now and then? How much political pain will President Trump and Republicans, facing midterms this fall, will they be willing to take? You know, there are some voices on the right, you know, who are already pushing Trump to resume military operations, noting that Iran is taking advantage of this ceasefire to recover some of their missile batteries, to move weapons around, and the like. So we don't know, but there are signs of hope and diplomacy. And there are talks potentially scheduled as soon as next week. So I think there will be some optimism there as those negotiations begin. But Jack Yallame, let's go with you for a moment, because Republicans are anxious about this war, anxious about what it could mean for November. There have been efforts here on the Hill to try to keep President Trump's war-making abilities in check. The War Powers Act, it's a close vote this week, it was, but it still went down to defeat. So what's the latest there from the Hill as they see the state of the war, where the blockade could be going?
Yeah, Jonathan, well, as you noted, that vote failed yesterday. And I think what the president is dealing with still, something that has plagued him throughout the entirety of this war, is competing desires right now. You know, even yesterday on the White House lawn, he said that a 20-year suspension of Iran's ability to enrich their uranium was not enough. That comes after after we reported that that's what was offered to the Iranians during negotiations in Pakistan, and that was countered by the Iranians with a 3-year suspension on their ability to enrich uranium, which even if you talk to former Biden administration officials, they believe that was actually a better possibility and a better deal than what was negotiated during the JCPOA, that any sort of multi-year suspension of their ability to enrich uranium was going to be, again, better than what the JCPOA had done. That being said, you just saw the president sort of, I think, cow to some of the hardline right conservative voices that he's been hearing that have basically said, we're not going to accept any long-term deal unless it permanently bans their ability to create a nuclear weapon. But what you're seeing on the Hill right now is a lack of an appetite to continue at least to continue fighting again, to resume the war past this ceasefire. But the president also says he doesn't see a situation right now where they're going to extend the ceasefire. There are really so many unknowns here. We're taking it hour by hour at the White House. And at the same time, you are also seeing lawmakers reticent to allocate the appropriations that the Pentagon has asked for to continue fighting this war. That's going to be the next big battle ahead.
All right.